also want to be able to plug it in a few places because it seemed like an interesting conversation to have. But if you wanna come on right now, we can talk a little bit about it. But yeah, well, we can talk about it. Hold on, let me get on voice right now. Alright, I'm in the general channel whenever you want to come in.
Don't worry, you don't have to prepare much to talk to me.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing alright. I've had a pick-me-up. About a pick-me-up, I've got caffeine in my system, so...
Yeah, that's always fun. Let me, real quick, I'm gonna change the stream title and the category real quick. Let me just save and quit Bioshock real quick so I can pay attention to this. Because I don't want to be multitasking too.
Yeah.
Give me just 1 second to update my Twitch and phone. We can get right into it.
And just a heads up, I do vape, so you will hear that once in a while.
Oh yeah, don't worry about it.
I'm not getting buzzed off nicotine, it's just enough to keep the cravings away.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I've never really had any issues with smoking. Like I thankfully stayed away from that just because I don't like shit in my lungs. But a lot of people are. I've heard vaping's really helpful.
Yeah. Well, I kind of still stay on nicotine because it helps with my ADHD. It helps me focus for long periods of time.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that with ADHD. Like
Yeah.
a few of my friends vape for the same reason.
And at least if it's a low dosage of like nicotine, it's not like completely fucking up my future. So there's that.
Right.
There's
Alrighty.
I'm not getting any of that tar in my system.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
definitely a big thing. So everything on Twitch is updated. So just
Yeah.
for the VOD, in case anyone's listening to this and not reading chat, you want to like introduce yourself and get your credentials?
I don't want to give away my real name.
No, that's completely fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. But I am the de facto leader of the Libertarian Communist faction of the Scottish Socialist Party. I've been active in politics for about 6 years. I used to be a filthy centrist, and now I'm a fully blown ANCOM. I'm also a minority within minorities because I'm a Christian anarchist
Oh.
as well. Catholic specifically, if you're interested.
Yeah. Well,
but
there is actually, I don't know about the. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I tend to like sometimes get overly involved in this conversation, so don't let me derail your train of thought. But I've heard, at least in the U.S., especially in like with traditionally underrepresented groups like within Black Americans or within like working class Americans, there is a really strong history of like working class Christian socialism. And is that a similar thing that exists in Scotland, or is that
yeah.
Yeah.
What you find in Scotland, Scotland is quite it kind of still does have a lot of religious sectarianism. So the Presbyterian side of Scotland tends to be quite right wing and very
Right.
pro-union, whilst the Catholic side are very, very progressive.
Okay.
Because a lot of the Catholics came over from Ireland and they understand the class struggle of what it's like to be working class, because a lot of them came over like being precariously proletariat,
Right.
just looking for any job that would sustain them. My mom's side of the family are. I'm also a minority within a minority within a minority because I come from a very privileged background.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not just upper class, I'm aristocratic.
Oh. Well,
Yeah.
that's a pretty big mix. I mean, Kropotkin
Yeah.
can be an anarchist, I guess.
Yeah.
He was like royalty, wasn't he?
I mean, well, yeah, he gave up his princeship when he was, I think he was about 14. But yeah, I'm not part of the aristocracy. My family are just landed gentry.
Right.
They just own a whole bunch of land. And also a bunch of slave ships, which
Oof.
my uncle actually rebought the slave ship and renamed it after Karl Marx's daughter, Eleanor. He despised the fact that his family owned slaves, and the fact that most of his wealth came from slaves. So he just donated most of it to communist parties. Uh,
That's, I
um,
mean, props to him. That's a decision a
yeah.
lot of people wouldn't make.
When my aunt got his life insurance paid out when he died about 3 years ago, she carried on the tradition. She gave 80% of it away to I think she gave it to the SNP, the Greens, and the party I'm part of. She gave a little bit of it to the party I'm part of. But she also wanted to pay for the funeral because
Right.
those are pricey, and
Yeah. No.
uh,
Yeah.
especially when
That's understandable.
especially when they had 500 people at his funeral. Because he was part of the Freemasons, so the Freemasons all came around as well.
Oh.
That's when the conspiracy theorists listening to us stick their fucking hats on. Um,
Right.
but that's also when the neo-Nazis start sticking their hats on. You're
Yeah.
a Freemason and a communist. Dun,
Yeah.
dun, dun.
Yeah. I never really got so like we came in here to discuss public housing, and already we're going off the rails a little bit. If at any point you feel like we're getting away from what you came on to talk to, feel free and just redirect us.
Oh, don't worry about it. I can talk about almost anything.
The Freemason thing, like that's something that I've heard a lot about the conspiracy theories about the Freemasons. Just like that's whenever they're brought up, that's the only context I hear them brought up in is like they're just like a fraternal organization, aren't they? Like a Christian, like
They not Christian. No,
not Christian.
You can be
okay.
you can be a Muslim. You can be a Jew. You can be Buddhist. You can be a Jedi if you really want to. You
Okay.
just need to believe. You need to believe in a higher power. It's not specified which one.
Okay.
The Freemasons go back to just after the fall of Jesus Christ. They were specialized stonemasons who were taught by King Solomon. And King Solomon didn't want their to allude to who was taught by him. So they had the secret handshake. They grew into a fraternity, and it got passed on long after King Solomon died. So that's where the origins of the Freemasons came from. They were just stonemasons who were exceptionally skilled at stonemasonry.
Right.
And that's kind of where the whole kind of sexist, like only men can be Freemasons, but that's changing very slowly.
Yeah, and I've heard it. So the little bit I do know about like Freemason organizations is that it's not one unified group anymore. Like there are a few different, like there's Scottish Freemasons. There's I think they're, and it sort of is dependent on which group you're talking about. Some of the specifics of like what they believe and who can be a part of it.
Scottish Freemasons, they have to take a solemn vow to donate 80% of their wealth to charity.
Oh.
That's a solemn vow. They cannot break it. They're not allowed to. They have a treasurer of the Freemasons that does their all of their accountancy for all of the different lodges, and his job is to make sure everyone is donating 80% of their income to charity.
Yeah, that's huge.
And that was my uncle's job. Because he was a treasurer of a Freemasonry lodge here. But yeah, on the other side of my mum's family, it's as working class as you can get. Irish travelers. And on my dad's side, it's mostly it's mostly steel workers. Apart from my grandmother's side, they came from Russia.
Okay.
My great aunt was a sniper in World War II.
Oh, that's
for the Red Army.
Well, that's that's like a really interesting family history. Like that goes like all sorts of directions.
But yeah, that's as much of that's my history. That's my credentials.
So the group that you are part of,
there is one thing I didn't
Okay.
mention. I am also an urban and industrial sociologist by education. Go on. Um,
Oh, no, that's actually really interesting. What I was gonna bring up is so the group you're part of, it's a libertarian, socialist, libertarian, communist group in Scotland. Is there like
right.
beyond like the basics of like
So
worker controlled means of production? Is there any particular messaging that you're like focusing on with
right.
that particular group?
So with the political party itself, the political party has existed since 1999.
Okay.
Um, the political party itself is Democratic Socialist, left wing, anti-capitalist, Scottish Republican, Scottish Independence, that kind of thing. I simply belong to a faction within that group.
Okay.
Because I was the loudest voice in the room, I got made the leader, and thus the spokesperson for an entire faction.
Right.
And, um, like it's gotten to the point where I'm sat there chain vaping in the middle of conferences, telling the old fogies to get off the stage because they've been talking for 30 minutes longer than they should have been. And, uh, and yeah, my main stance is that the state should play a massive role in economics, but not in people's personal lives. So
Right.
I believe that people should be able to marry who they want, within reason. Um, because then you get into some ANCAP territory.
Right.
uh, people should be able to inject whatever drugs they want into their body. That is perfectly fine with me. I don't trust people regardless of whether they're a heroin addict or they are occasional weed smoker. I don't care.
Right.
Um, um, and that the state should be there as a baseline to provide the baseline necessities for all of its people, regardless of whether they are born in the country or not.
Okay. And from there, like, so the basics of what that's sounding like is more like it's like a libertarian social democratic platform from what I've heard. Like, does your group, I'm sure if you're like a socialist
The,
group, then you believe in like worker controlled means of production,
yeah,
like
yeah.
democratization of the workplace, as well as like
I am thoroughly I'm not right. How do I phrase this? I'm not opposed to nationalization.
right.
I just think it would be better to be put in the hands of the workers.
Right.
So what I propose is that the National Health Service be collectivized. So the nurses, doctors, everything, they all run the place. We give them the means to figure out what the best income or the best budget for them is to run optimally. So you give them an economist, you give them an accountant, and you try and work with them, and they say, okay, here's the numbers that we need to run optimally at the amount of hospitals that we currently have, as well as the amount, and to pay our workers a decent wage.
Okay.
And then the state has to agree to that, because otherwise they can just say we're not going to do anything, and that would be that would be a massive issue for the state.
Right. Yeah.
um, same thing can go for housing, like amenities and stuff like that. You could do that with the railways. The railways would be a perfect example of that.
Right, and
Um,
those I know, the railways in the United Kingdom have recently been going through privatizations, right? That's been causing a lot of issues from what I've heard.
if by recently you mean in past 30 years, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
they were in Scotland. The railways are partially nationalised. So in Scotland, we have two main railway companies. We have ScotRail and we have East Coast Trains.
okay,
East Coast Trains are privatised, and ScotRail, their contract recently got it basically timed out. So the government has control of ScotRail for the time being. So ScotRail, if you're basically in Scotland, ever since we heard ScotRail is now nationalised, we basically got the get go of if you're gonna travel anywhere, go on ScotRail because it's gonna be cheaper. It's
right,
gonna it's gonna be cheaper. It's gonna be on time. But yeah, like
okay. So yeah, like
nationalisation.
yeah, sorry. So this all ties back to I guess what we were talking about earlier in chat about public housing. Like it seems to me like with rail, with housing, with the United, thankfully, the healthcare system in the UK is at least somewhat better than it is in America. But especially with healthcare, all of these attempts at privatization, not only they're introduced as cost saving measures for
But
the
it's not the
taxpayer.
worst.
It's not the worst.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
not the worst. Yeah.
well, oh, yeah, the NHS is I'm not talking about the specifics of that right now, but just the whole process of privatization in general. It seems as if privatizing all these public services tends to lead overall to results that are contrary to what they're originally sold at. Like a private company will come into the government and they'll say, "Hey, we can do this for you'll be paying us less money, and that will let you lower taxes. It will let you campaign on that." But what actually ends up happening is people spend more money out of their pocket on these same services than they would be if they were spending tax money on it, because that private company's got to make a profit. And
Yeah.
you can apply
So
that to almost any industry. As
one
you
one of the points that I make is that with collectivization, the difference between nationalization and collectivization is nationalization can be
right,
undone
right.
with no serious public backlash. If you collectivize, then the workers who are working those industries will take backlash when you try to privatize them.
That does make sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, because it was never in state ownership, the state doesn't have control over that. The state doesn't have any rights in that situation.
Okay.
Um, uh, the only rights that the state has in that situation is to agree or disagree to the budget that the NHS gives them, that they need in order to function. Um, but apart from that, the state doesn't have any control over the NHS at all, not one iota. Um, I guess you could have a spokesperson between the state and the NHS, which we currently technically do, which is Jeannie Freeman. She's the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport, and she's also a Marxist Leninist.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, if there's anyone that I would like to see is like staying in that position for the rest of her life, it's her.
Right. Yeah,
uh,
that's a shocker to me. Someone being like openly
yeah.
Marxist in government. That from like an American perspective is something that they would be like immediately out. Like no one would allow that to happen. So that is a little bit
Jeannie,
of a shocker to hear.
me and Jeannie actually have one thing in common because I'm like a fairly like young like leader or like sub leader of like a movement. Um, she was the youth leader of the Communist Party of Great Britain when she was younger,
Huh.
so she understands my plight. She
Right.
trying to juggle a bunch of 22-year-olds is much harder than it looks.
No, yeah, and I haven't been as involved in like a lot of local movements as I probably should be for a lot of personal reasons that are
Yeah.
take way too long to get into. My life has been in crisis management mode for the past like 2 years straight. So, but um, so yeah, trying to think of what direction to take this in next because we came in here originally to discuss public housing. We've gone off in a
Yeah.
whole bunch of which is fine. That this is
Yeah.
but it seems
Um,
like the so how have you been able to take in your role with this party? What measures have you like? Do you have any notable accomplishments in collectivizing workplaces that you'd like to talk about, or is that, or at least pushing that idea forward into the public consciousness? Like, what sort of successes have you managed to have in that field?
I've managed to sway the well, it didn't take much swaying to be honest. She was already with me when I got when I got there. But the one of the spokespeople for the party kind of agrees with me and is very because she's an ecologist, I'm a sociologist. It's going to go somewhere eventually, and we're not
Right.
entirely sure where. um, but yeah, she agrees with me on the collectivization aspect. The thing with Rasheen McLaren, she is the perfect embodiment of left unity that that I could put together in my mind. Her mother is a Marxist. Her mother is a Trotskyist, and her father is a Marxist Leninist. and she's a libertarian communist.
Yeah, that's yep.
And she's also what we call a hawker, which means she does falconry.
Okay. Yeah, that's
um,
huh.
she's she's an eco-communist, as I like to put it.
Right.
But yeah, I've done done my I've done my bloody hardest to try and push a lot of this forward. One of my successes before I joined the party was getting a bill passed through the Scottish Parliament. Um, Basically, in Scotland, we have the Scottish Youth Parliament.
Right.
So when you are 14 to 24, you can join the Scottish Youth Parliament. You can join us at any party you want. You don't have to be like a paying member or anything. You can just align yourself with them, and you can actually sit in the Parliament.
Okay.
You don't have to be. You do have to be elected in, but everyone's allowed to be part of the Youth Parliament.
Okay.
One of the measures or motions that I put forward in the Scottish Youth Parliament, granted this was like about 3 years ago, was to put a counsellor and psychologist inside of every high school in the country to take a lot of strain off of the mental health sector, especially now, because our mental health sector isn't doing too great because budgets have been cut.
Right.
But so to try and like move things around so that we can still have a functioning mental health sector, but we can still
Right.
manage at
To
what we're at.
it like lowers the burden, especially when you're able to with especially with youth. And this is something I am a person that suffers from mental health issues, and this is a subject that is pretty close to me. Like a lot of, especially with situations like that, when you're talking about situations of young people in schools, are you talking like well, I'm approaching this mostly from the American perspective with like a high school or a middle school. Like, are you talking about lower education or like university level? With
but I'm talking about like lower education, not quite university.
Okay,
just before college.
Well, yeah, that's something I think where it's especially important to have that, because when you're able to reach out to younger children about mental health and about things that are just conceptually they're harder to understand, and when you're able to cultivate a good attitude and educate people about those at a younger age, that's an especially important form of harm reduction, and that can lead forward to, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. It's just it will lead forward and it will reduce the burden on that they take up later on, because teaching them those coping skills is easier when they're younger.
And also on top of that, if they have a counselor and a psychologist in school, they can they can get diagnosed and receive the help immediately.
Exactly. Yes.
Such as if they have depression or anxiety or autism, dyslexia, so on and so forth.
Yes.
You can get them help immediately. Make change at the start, as my biology teacher always said, and that's the reason why she became a teacher in high school. She wanted to make a change from the start, and that is the life lesson that I have taken throughout my entire life: is you change things from the start. You have to educate people on how to react to friends who are depressed, anxious, people who have autism. Don't treat them any differently, but just be a little bit more hands-on and actually like at least act like you care.
Right,
because
and
that makes all the difference.
Well, a lot of those lessons too can take even for neurotypical people, like it's sort of like a less. I feel like people underestimate the amount of teaching required in social skills, if you know what I mean. Like people there's a lot of, like, I think, pushback to the idea of a social skill being something that is taught rather than just learned through abstract behavior. And well, like hands-on learning of like how to share with your friends, how to treat people with dignity and respect. Well, like I'm not going to dismiss the importance of like doing that for its own sake and learning to do it. I think that being able to teach especially young children these
Yeah.
attitudes and how to treat each other with respect does have like tremendous impacts later on in their life.
Like one of the key areas that I want to make a change to in the education system, other than the changes I've already made, albeit somewhat indirectly, is the factor that we need to we have to put more practical lessons into science classes, more
Right.
practical lessons into music classes. Theory is fine, and I come from a background of doing sound engineering. I'm a fully trained sound engineer, but the fact of the matter is if it weren't for the fact that I was in school when theory was basically on the back burner and practical skills were on the front, I wouldn't have gotten anywhere. Because
Right.
I can't read sheet music. My mind is not wired like that, and you cannot force a child who is not in tune with that, pardon the pun, but you cannot force someone who's not already in line with that to do that.
Okay.
You can have like kids who are very interested in music, but they get switched off immediately as soon as you start talking about reading music sheets.
Yeah, no, that does make a
You
lot of
could
sense to me.
you could have a fucking savant on your hands, and you've just switched them off for life.
Exactly. No, I do agree with that. I have an anecdote related to this. That like it's an anecdote, but I think that this so that my own educational background is I went to university in Vermont for
Mm,
and before that during high school I was doing dual credit college courses. So I between those two I have most of my bachelor's degree. I did end up leaving college for a lot of like mental health reasons that I do plan on going back, but it's been a weird educational journey for me. But my lower education, they're from like middle school and high school, where I was homeschooled for that entire period. And
yeah.
homeschooling is a weird subject for me because from my own experience, it was something that was very helpful for me. But at the same time, I live in Texas and I've seen other homeschoolers in Texas who live in going through that homeschooled experience for them allows their parents to essentially brainwash them. So
Yeah.
it's a tricky subject because I see both sides of the debate, and I don't know. I from what I've heard, the idea of homeschooling is something that's a lot less prevalent all over Europe or all over the UK or something like that.
Mm.
But one of
It's
the
it's
ideas.
very uncommon.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
It's very uncommon here. State
Yeah.
schooling is like the go-to.
Yeah, no, it's somewhat uncommon in the U.S. as well, just not as uncommon. Like there was a large community of homeschoolers that I met. But one of the ideas that I was exposed to as a homeschooler, and this is something that I think benefited my own education a lot, is like you were saying with collectivization for a lot of other fields. Um, a lot of my experience as a homeschooler wasn't necessarily sitting down at home, like being taught by my parents. But what happened was families would form these things called educational cooperatives, where
Yeah.
each of the family members, and this comes from a position of uh, a lot of these people are people of some position of privilege, where they're able to have like a parent who's doing essentially unpaid teaching labor for an entire group.
Yeah.
But the idea is that a collective of people will come together. They'll bring their own children in for education, and you get people from all sorts of backgrounds this way that can continue to with different classes on offer, that you allow children to choose which classes they'd like to take, and you allow them to guide their own learning style within those classes. Like a lot of the classes I took in that setting were democratized in favor of the students as well. Like if we ever wanted to do a certain discussion topic or work on a certain specific thing, that was our decision to make.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is a concept that I think could be applied a lot further.
I am very, very, very familiar with this idea.
Yeah,
Basically, it's Sudbury schools scaled up.
yeah,
Sudbury schools are elementary schools that employ direct democracy amongst all of their kids. If their kids want to learn about something, they teach them about that thing. Um, and that goes on for like I think it's about 6 years, um, until they go into high school. If you got high schoolers to do that, you might actually have a incredibly not just skilled workforce, but clever and politically and socially aware.
Exactly. Like these sort of political habit. Like I this goes back to what I was saying earlier about social skills being taught as well as learned. Like being in those
Mhm.
situations where you're exposed to, and this is one of the double-edged swords of like homeschooling as a way of accomplishing this. I do think this sort of schooling is something that should be adopted by like at the state level and
Mhm.
regulated rather than just being left off to individual families because it can go wrong. But the idea of like having people engaged from a young age in their own education and having a personal stake in it um
Mm.
allows people to like feel as if they're having an impact on their own life, and that's something that
Well,
a lot of people just don't get for most of
And
their
that's
existence. Yeah,
and that's one of the lot of like unfortunate lifestyle lessons that we're taught in state schooling is that
right,
you can do whatever you want, but it's not going to change a damn thing.
exactly.
And that's what carries on to people's personal lives and their political lives. Is they start getting into this mindset of when I was in high school, I could do whatever the hell I wanted, but it wasn't going to change anything. And if anything, I was going to get in trouble for making my own decisions. So they don't vote, or like I can understand like anarchists who don't vote because duh, but um, like in the case of like they'll just follow anyone else's lead. One of the weird things, and I was saying this to a friend of mine, and this goes slightly off topic, is that with and she's originally from Texas, but I think she lives up in Maine now.
Yeah,
Um, uh, she said this, and I partially agreed, is that the difference between like Republican men in Texas, and Republican men are very open and they're very like not really open-minded as such, but more the fact that they're proud of it.
right.
Whilst a Republican woman, from my experience anyway, tends to be Republican because their family are, and what they're looking for is a democratic man that they can say, "Oh, I'm now a Democrat because of him," and just use that as an excuse to leave the family behind.
um
Um,
yeah, I can sort of see that. Like yeah, that's sort of like a problematic
mm,
not necessarily I wouldn't say it's a problematic framing of it, but it's a problematic consequence of like the
yeah,
a lot of like patriarchal attitudes in Texas. But yeah, you
yeah.
do see that behavior. I would agree with that.
Because I saw that a lot with like friends, like one of my friends like from Kentucky, like her family are very very strict Republicans,
Yeah,
and she hated it, like fucking despised
right.
it.
Well,
Uh,
the
uh
other thing about that like sort of environment is like with a lot there are plenty of Republican families that don't do this. Like I don't want to paint everyone with a broad brush, but these are the type of families like where children will end up mistreated because they're afraid of speaking out against like their family,
oh
or this is
yeah,
like the same environment where like an LGBT child comes out to their parents and they get kicked out. Like I don't know.
yeah,
I know you watched his on stream. I saw that emote earlier, but
yeah,
I don't know if you've watched one of his moderator streams, Izzy Bear 713. That's her experience as a trans woman. She was kicked out of her parents' house at 13 and lived on the streets until
yeah,
she could join the army. It's insane how this stuff is
yeah,
even allowed to happen, and it's a sort of attitude
yeah.
of family dominance, I think, that lets it happen, and it's a toxic attitude.
There's yeah, one of what was I gonna say?
Oh, sorry if
Um,
I'm interrupting you. Feel free to. I that I do have like a very overbearing communication style. So if I'm ever interrupting your train of thought, just feel free to let me know.
uh, don't worry about it, man. Um, I'm getting my mind is like freaking all over the place.
That's fair.
Um, but um, yeah, it's rather strange. Yeah, one of the things I was going to say is that my friend who lives in Kentucky, one of the things that she was often told by her parents is that women should be seen, not heard. Like
Yeah, no,
that is a very common thing that a lot of like conservative like
yes,
like daughters are told.
that's an actual attitude. Hold on, someone in my chat is saying they're looking at my cat, and I have to move my head to get a better view of that. So, um, he's just on my bed
Priorities,
right
chat.
now.
Priorities.
Yeah. So yeah, that's an attitude. This is like your friend from Kentucky you're talking about. I don't know how prevalent that
Yeah.
attitude is outside of the U.S., but like the idea of women should be seen and not heard, the idea children should be seen or not heard in general. That's something that even in families where they don't outward, like I know people and families who would never in a million years outwardly say either of those like direct things, but that cultural standard of like literally patriarchal thinking, where the father is the king of the household, is something that's propagated a lot more subtly through like cultural manipulation that lets these ideas go unchallenged. And it's sort of like, because these ideas have existed for so long, even it takes like an active resistance to that sort of thinking in order for it to keep it from taking hold. It's almost diabolical how some of these things will spread.
Yeah, one of the big differences that I see between like the Southern conservative views of like running your family and stuff like that is that uh, I grew up in a predominantly like Irish household.
Yeah.
My mum's of an Irish Glaswegian background. And Irish families are matriarchal. The
Yes.
mother runs everything. You do not argue with the mother. You do not fight with the mother. You do not threaten your mother, because she will beat you upside the head. She will. My mum recently grabbed her ex-boyfriend by the scruff of the neck and banged his head against the banister in a nightclub, and played his head like a fucking drum.
Jesus.
You don't argue. You do not argue with Irish women.
Yeah.
And that's the case for Scottish families as well. Not just I see this with a lot of like just Celtic families in general. If you have like any kind of Irish tint inside of your family, there's always a matriarchal like atmosphere, and you see this with Italian families as well.
No, yeah, I was about to actually bring that up. I do have. Well,
Yeah.
I'm very American. My family is all most of them are recent immigrants. Both like I do have a lot of very recent Italian ancestry in my family, and that's you can see the same thing in that group. Even a few generations down into like Italian American households, you can see the same thing happen.
Yeah. And also Russian American as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we got a little bit sidetracked by that. But it's completely fine. Yeah. But yeah, like that's trying to think of like I think that all of these are like there are a lot of cultural norms that are reinforced by not necessarily conscious decisions, but by the material conditions of how people live. Like if you're this is something that you have an academic background in. Like you have an academic background in sociology, right?
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, because you're gonna know more about this than I would. But it seems to me like a lot of these implicit behaviors of like either a patriarchal or matriarchal family or a democratic family unit, all of these things to me seem like these don't appear in a vacuum. I'm sort of the opinion that there's not necessarily one human nature. Well, obviously, like nature versus nurture is a really complicated subject, but I think that these cultural behaviors usually emerge because of specific material conditions, and that you can finding those conditions that lead to these behaviors can lead you to understand what parts of them are beneficial and should be encouraged
Yeah.
and continued through culture, through the extent that we can encourage and continue those by our own conscious decisions.
You can
And
you can sum this up
yeah,
in what Marx talked about as the base and the superstructure.
yeah,
So the base is the tools, the factories, the machines, the land, the raw materials, as well as the relations of the production, like the lumpen proletariat, labor aristocracy, bourgeoisie, etc.
right,
Um, the base shapes the superstructure. So the superstructure is the ideology, law, politics, science, education, religion, philosophy, culture, art, even.
right,
And the superstructure maintains the base. So it's a circular motion. They they need each other in order to survive. They are the Batman to each other's Joker.
right. And this is something I've
Um,
been reading about. I haven't necessarily read as much Marx as I probably should. I've been reading Gramsci recently, and he talks a little bit
mm,
about this as well, and with this idea of like cultural hegemony and how
yeah.
capitalism has a way of uh infiltrating
So
culture in a way where capitalistic qualities are intrinsically seen as good, and because of that it's as you said, it's self-reinforcing, where if something is good because it's capitalist because it's good, and that same cycle continues over and over.
so the way I usually explained it to when I was explaining it to students and stuff like that, because I used to tutor,
Yes.
is in the case of functionalism. Functionalism is a bunch of is just a it's almost like a giant pyramid scheme. There's just a bunch of boxes and they all go up and up and up and up, and before you know it, you're up at the top 1%. Um, the idea of, say, conservatism is to conserve who is in those boxes, and most of those boxes are contained by men.
Right.
So conservatives will keep the men in those positions. Um, some conservatives might be a little bit more socially liberal, and when you get to the bottom of society, they'll move around the boxes like a couple of times, and they'll allow more gay people and everything. That's fine. That's where social liberalism comes into the mix.
Right.
Social democracy, they don't. Um, Social democrats basically change who is in those boxes, but they don't change the structure of said boxes on top of each other.
Right. Yeah. That's one of my
Yeah.
that is a criticism I'd have of social democracy as well. Is even when it does lead to more equitable distributions within like a certain group of people. If you look at countries that have adopted, I don't mean to interrupt you. Sorry, if you want to continue, go ahead. But
Um, whilst say something like state socialism,
yeah,
so Marxist Leninism, Trotskyism, Castroism, so on and so forth, they will remove a couple of the middle boxes, and they'll just put the top boxes. So they'll equalize. They'll equalize the pyramid scheme.
right,
Um, there's still going to be a hierarchy, but it's not going to be as profound. Um, whilst with communism, you basically not only remodel all the boxes, you get rid of the everything past the top, like past the bottom and up,
right,
and you basically just flatten it. Everyone's got the same.
exactly.
Um, Meanwhile, with fascists, it's just
It's a
two
continue.
line. It's
Right.
no, no, no,
It's like a
no.
totem
It's
pole.
yeah, yeah. It's it's a totem pole of just a massive base and a massive penis sticking up into the air.
Exactly. Yeah.
There you
It's a
go.
totem pole where you're constantly whacking the bottom parts out with a hammer to knock them into a fire.
And Nazis pretty much do the same thing.
Yeah.
Or rather, they get rid of basically Nazis. They focus around the idea of a falsified enemy.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's
And the falsified enemy is obviously Jews and minorities and everything else
right.
like that. They think that minorities are running the world. They're not.
What do you think about the idea of fascism? I see it often discussed in leftist groups of fascism being the natural response of liberal capitalism to
Oh, absolutely.
the yeah, okay, yeah,
It's
it's
it's the it's the last dying screams of liberal capitalism. When capitalism knows that it's on its last death throes, that's when fascism arrives. Because one of the weird things with fascism is it's very fascists are very good at hiding the fact that they're fascists.
right,
Usually, historically anyway. Fascists won't come in with us. In the words of Mary Black, who's a member of the SNP here, fascists will not come in with a stomping boot. They'll come in and they'll say, "We'll clean up your area for you. We'll give you good jobs. We'll pay you better, and things like that." But they ask only one favor: your unquestionable obedience.
exactly, right. And when you well, it's almost like I feel as if a lot of capitalist structures like the hierarchy constructed under capitalism in the workplace is something that is will be applied to government. When I honestly believe that a lot of I want to find a way to phrase this that isn't incredibly problematic, because obviously fascism is much
Yeah.
worse than a liberal democracy. It ends with people
Oh,
outwardly being genocided. But I
yeah.
feel as if the same power dynamic as a fascist state exists in most liberal countries under the guise of like a fair employment opportunity. Like if you're working for minimum wage jobs and don't real if you're going from job to job in a minimum wage position because you have some uh there are a lot of people who have no choice in the matter of improving themselves and moving up from these minimum wage positions because they're hard to employ, either because they're disabled or because they have a gender presentation that is offensive to some employers, although it's illegal to discriminate based on that. It does happen, and you'll find people who are fighting for their own existence
Yep.
within capitalism because they have their that's same structure exists. It's just under the illusion of free choice of who you want to submit to within that structure.
Yeah. So, the fascist mindset is that they slowly entry into conservative groups. They make it very
Right,
difficult for LGBT people to exist, disabled, religious minorities, etc. They create a problem. They create a mass hysteria as such. Um, they make it difficult for these people to get jobs. They make
right,
it difficult for these people to go anywhere and do anything that they want to. Um, and they know that the inevitability of that, for example, is that those people will become homeless. They will become an easy scapegoat. So the fascists will come along and say, "Oh, we can get rid of these people. We can make life better for these people," in air quotes.
right,
But what they're actually saying is, we'll exterminate these people so they're not living on the streets. That's what they say. That's what they really mean when they say, "Oh, we're going to clean up the streets for you.
right.
We're going to get rid
Exactly,
of we're going to get rid of the undesirables."
exactly. Yeah, no, that's something that you can even see. Like, I am not. I don't like making the comparison of ICE versus the Gestapo without
Mm.
like I don't like making that comparison lightheartedly, because it's something that is obviously we're not at
Like,
that point yet,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's it's something
I
that is I think a valid comparison to make. You target like a lot of the people that are targeted by ICE are targeted by race. Like there are things like
yeah,
racially profile stop and searches in some states, like Arizona, for example. The police can demand papers from a brown person for driving around. It's
tech,
or anywhere within like I think 200 miles of the border. ICE can do it, but
yeah.
ICE doesn't enforce that as often because they don't have the staff to go running around pulling people over. That's usually more of like a local
Now,
policy. But yeah,
ICE
it's
is
insane.
ICE ICE is an interesting topic, a talking point, because this is where a lot of people are like, AOC is great, but I don't necessarily agree with that. AOC is a breath of fresh air in comparison to the establishment Democrats, absolutely.
Yes.
And I have no issue with her as an individual. But the problem is that and she said this time and time again in multiple interviews, is that she believes in abolishing ICE, but she's not against getting rid of what ICE does. She wants to redistribute the jobs of ICE to other departments.
Yeah, and that's a criticism I'd make of social democrats in general, because so I
Mm.
do think the social democratic movement in America has been incredibly important in harm reduction, and I'm not an accelerationist. I do believe that harm reduction is genuinely valuable in not only increasing the immediate quality of life of people, but allowing those people
Yeah.
to educate themselves on political issues further, allowing them to push towards more revolutionary activity. But I think that the issue with social democrats and with stopping at a social democracy is that these same power structures we've been talking about for this entire conversation will still exist. They'll be a little
Yeah.
bit harder to detect. Like some the capitalist, the like bourgeoisie class will always find some externality that they can profit off of. Where in some social democratic states, it will be by exporting their labor overseas and exploiting the proletariat of another country if they're unable to do it profitably at home. It could be from exploiting the environment in ways that are detected as a market externality that they don't necessarily pay a monetary cost for, but it still dramatically affects the environment in which people live. Though there's always going to be, with a hierarchy of that sort, something is going to be on the bottom, and even if the bottom isn't that bad for the citizens of that particular country, there's going to be an externality that's a market externality that's propping up a social
And
democracy.
and one of the things is one argument that is incredibly simple to make from leftists of like social democrats to ancoms should be making this argument, because it's almost like impossible for conservatives to come back against it. Is conservatives will say communism won't work because people are too greedy. However, their idea of a better welfare state is one funded by charity.
Right. Yeah, no,
Contradiction.
that is a huge contradiction. I will say there's a great quote. Let me pull up the exact quote, because it's let me pull up the exact quote because it's a really powerful quote. I actually sorry, I'm just finding the actual quote because it's
The last capitalist we hang will be the one that sold us the rope.
no, it's that's a good one. This is one that I'm gonna take a little bit of credit. Hassan started using this one because I was the one who I think originally showed it to him. I'm gonna brag a little bit on that. But
Yeah.
the quote is, to look at people in capitalist society and conclude that human nature is egoism is like looking at people in a factory where pollution is destroying their lungs and saying that it is human nature to cough. Like there are a lot of I think conservatives are right when they say that people do behave selfishly. They do behave in certain ways, but people the disagreement I'd have with that is we can look at incentive structures and normalization of these behaviors caused by capitalism that encourage, like you said, these are self-sustaining ideas that will in ways that are not easy to detect sustain themselves through culture and through people's underlying assumptions of how human beings act with each other.
And one of the things that we should stop doing as a society, especially in America, is glorifying millionaires who give to charity.
Yes.
Because I refer to that as surplus philanthropy.
Yeah.
They're taking the surplus. They're taking the surplus from the worker and they're giving it to. They're pay. They're That's the blatant equivalent of taking your money and putting it in an ISA account outside of the country so that no one can touch it.
Yes.
Because you're essentially giving it to a charity that 9 times out of 10 doesn't do anything with that money.
Yes.
If
No.
anything, it's just most like for example, like the CEO of Shelter, which is a homeless charity in air quotes. Um, uh, she makes something like 500,000 a year. Most of the money that Shelter gets on a year-to-year basis goes to her
Yeah,
to
and
do nothing.
well, yeah, and even beyond that, I think just dumping money into the I don't think you can ever cure the like we were talking earlier, addressing things at the source is incredibly important, and the source of a lot of these issues can never be fully addressed by dumping more money into a capitalist ecosystem. I do think there are a lot of charities that do have honestly noble goals and intentions, but that will be constantly like it's like would it be Sisyphus? He was the guy who rolled the boulder up the rock, right?
Yeah,
Like you
yeah.
keep pumping money into this capitalist system that causes these material conditions you're fighting against,
It's
and
gonna
it's
swing
gonna
by and hit you in the face.
exactly, yeah, and it's like if you have a charity where you want to feed the homeless or where you want to clothe the homeless, you're depending on the same systems that create those homeless people to fund and to work with your charity in a way that's I'm not I don't want to delegitimize the importance of this because people are, especially today, dependent on these charities, but I also don't think that they're a solution.
Yeah. Like one of the things that that's my biggest criticism of like social democrats. The social democrats tend to glorify these millionaires who are giving generously to charities,
Yeah,
quite a lot, almost as much as the conservatives do. Like Bill Gates, he's a perfect example.
right.
And I credit where credit is due. He has done a lot in like India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and stuff like that. He has done some good. But
Right.
Jesus Christ, Bill, at least fucking pay your workers a decent wage.
Well, he doesn't even have workers anymore. He's ascended to
Yeah.
the final phase of the billionaire where you just live off of the interest of what you've already earned. And
Yeah.
this is an especially, this is going back to conservatives. This is another hypocritical conservative position that I see all the time, where recipients of welfare are seen as lazy because they don't work and they want to like have a roof over
But
their head.
billionaires are glorified.
Yeah, well, a billionaire who owns like 7 yachts and a private helicopter for each one is doing the same amount of work, but they're collecting the surplus value of other people's work additionally, and receiving massive corporate welfare from in the form of tax breaks, in the form of like loopholes that keep them from paying any taxes. It's insane.
But yeah, when I was 16, my uncle, he gave me a copy of his credit card and he said in verbatim, "Take this and travel the world, because I don't want you turning into a filthy conservative who thinks all about himself.
Yeah.
Go travel the world and travel the world and learn about other people's cultures, because you'll realize very quickly how fucking privileged you've got it.
Yeah, no,
You
that's
may feel like that your life is fucking shit, and it is, but you have nothing on what is out there.
yeah.
Uh,
No,
that is
I
the most privileged thing that my uncle ever did for me.
no, that's an opportunity that I think a lot of people
Yeah.
do need to have, like to be able to see, because a lot of people look at privilege, and I think I honestly don't like the word privilege because it's I understand the concept of it, and it's something that is important for it is a concept that's important for people to understand. But from a marketing perspective, I feel like the word privilege is something that can be easily twisted to say, oh, it's a privilege as in you should not be able to exist in this sort of way. But no, it's a privilege. Like, being privileged doesn't necessarily mean that your life is perfect. It means that there's bullshit other people are putting up with that you're not. And I don't like getting into like language police territory, because that is usually just a completely counterproductive conversation. But it is that the word privilege is something that's twisted a lot, especially by the right, in order to make it seem like something it isn't. And it's important for people to realize that privilege isn't.
Like, there is one thing that the white woke working class in this country, in Scotland, don't understand, because in America, yes, it's almost impossible to be racist towards white people, because they've never been a subsidized group.
Right.
But in the UK, that's not entirely true, because Polish people, Romanians, Irish travelers, specifically Irish
Right.
travelers, have been. So anytime a white person who comes from a privileged background turns around and says I'm a gypsy or I'm a pikey because I come from an Irish traveling background, because I grew up in an Irish traveling community, anytime they call me a gypsy or a pikey, I turn around and call them a cracker. Because if they get pissed off at me, then they know how I feel anytime they call me a gypsy or a pikey.
Right. Yeah. No. These are the concept of like being white is something that I think almost universally historically, whiteness has never been an inclusive category. It's always been an exclusive category. It's always been something that's used to demonize a particular group of people that is not white.
Mhm.
And the in-group and the out-group shift over time. Like in America, whiteness is mostly like who is white is still under debate in some situations with like Middle Eastern people and with Latino people. Some like there's some shifting of the boundaries there.
And with Ashkenazi Jewish people, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Like yeah. there's but there are groups in America that like Italian people, Irish immigrants, immigrants from all sorts of European countries other than basically like Germany or the UK.
I do think there's a case to be made that Ashkenazi Jewish people are well, they are white, but they're a subsection of white, because they are of mostly European like background.
Well, the whole point is that the concept of whiteness and race in general, I think, is fairly arbitrary. And when like I think white as a race is not necessarily like there isn't really necessarily a white culture. There isn't necessarily like a white identity other than the identity of not being unjustly targeted because of your race. And this is because the whole concept of whiteness exists. The only reason whiteness exists is to discriminate against people who are not white. And this is like you can see because of these shifting boundaries that's the case. Historically, like there are groups that have not been white that are now white, and I can't think of any off the top of my head groups that are now not white, even though they used to be white. But I'm sure something equivalent exists.
The thing within like Irish traveler community is that a lot of people don't class Irish travelers as being white because Irish travelers have this stereotype of being in tight-knit groups. And they only really marry within the community, and they don't really leave the community and like date elsewhere. So the stereotype is, yes, we're all incest. We're all,
right.
Technically speaking, most humans on this planet are a product of incest somewhere.
Right.
Especially in the South of America. Let's be fair. Let's be.
Hey now.
Someone was getting it off with someone else who happened to have the same last name. Doesn't matter if it was second cousin or third cousin, still cousins.
Well, yeah, no, the larger point I'm trying to make is like all of these racial distinctions are in a way arbitrary, and like it's just another form of hierarchy, really. I am. Well, race does have an effect on people's day-to-day lives. Like it has a very real effect. It still is at the end of the day a social construct. Like you can't look at someone and objectively determine that they're white or they're black based on looking at their genetics. Like you base it off of how they look to you. Like you have white passing people who are would not consider to be culturally white, like Irish traveler communities or Roma communities or some areas of the Middle East. You can have someone who's white passing, and they'll be treated as white until they say like something that flips the switch, and they'll suddenly be treated very differently. It's
Yeah,
not.
like
I do believe that cultures among ethnicities and cultures among nationality have an important place in people's day-to-day lives, and they can have positive impacts on people. But I think specifically race is something that only exists in as a tool to divide people.
yeah. Um, like I use snakes as the perfect example of this because snakes come in all different shapes and colors, but snakes don't give a flying fuck what color you're.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, no, that's a good example.
most 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 humans make a big fucking deal like, oh, he's mixed, oh, he's Asian. Does it really matter? No,
Yeah.
not really. Um, I'm a big fan of like Malcolm X and stuff like that, and his kind of like tradition of things is like be kind, be courteous, but if a man puts his hand on you, send him to the graveyard.
Yep. I mean, I would agree with that. Um so yeah, we originally
Like
came in here to discuss public housing, and I kind of want to get back to
yeah,
that.
it's probably a
It's
good
been a
time.
long and winding conversation.
Yeah, it's
Um
probably a good time to go round, but like circle back round to that. Yeah.
yeah. um so um I want to restate my opinions on this just in case I think we have some new people watching. Um so my idea for viable public housing from a US perspective, where this is something that can be implemented at the city level or at the municipal level and can be pitched to like a neoliberal government,
Yeah.
um is public housing as an investment opportunity for the city or the municipality, where the city will build public housing and rent it out as a profit, as basically acting as a real estate development company. They'll rent
Yeah.
it out at fair market value to make a profit over X number of years until they've made a certain return on that investment. And then beyond that, they'll hold the ownership of the property, but the tenants within that society will collectivize, and they act as the property manager. They act as uh, the source to they act within themselves in order to maintain the property and to attract new tenants.
Yeah.
And this I think is a great start for public housing in
Yeah.
areas where public housing isn't necessarily accepted. And I wanted to see if you had any particular thoughts about that from your perspective, or if that's something that
Yeah.
like you would agree with, or if there's any specific criticisms you would have of that idea, because this is something I've been kicking around for a
We
while.
we were actually supposed to do that.
Yeah.
So in post World War II, in the 1950s or 60s, we started building public housing with that
Right.
exact goal in mind. Um, we although with a slight difference, the plan is that after a set amount of years, the housing prices would go down because they had made they broke the like broke the house out, like how much it cost to actually build the housing in the first place.
Right.
Um, so after that point, all the housing prices would go down. Problem is that never happened because
Right.
conservative governments, neoliberals, Thatcherite government that closed all of the mines. So even if they did lower the house prices, no one had any jobs to actually, make up the difference.
Right.
Um, so with my idea is you basically take out the middleman entirely. You basically say, right, these houses are now free. If you're and you still go through the same process, except no money is changing hands. So you apply to a house, you apply to like a flat or whatever, and if you're disabled, you get the first dibs on like the ground floors. Um, and everything else is pretty much fair game.
Okay.
Um, you apply and depending if you have if you have to get to work in a particular area, they'll set you up in a house that is suitable in a local to where you work.
Yeah.
And you won't have to change any hands. You just move in, boom, done.
Yeah, no, and
Because
I do think that's the end point. Sorry, do you have?
yeah,
I don't mean to interrupt you if you got something else to say
because
about that.
because a lot of because a lot of the public housing that exists in especially in my city, Edinburgh, they've been around since the early 1950s. Um, by now we've made more than enough profit on those houses to make them free.
Right.
That's basically my line of thought.
No, yeah, I do agree with that. And I guess the perspective is also one of like existing public housing versus public housing to be constructed, because as you said, like, you're coming from an area where there's already public housing that's been built, and the like, it's been there's been a lot of profit made from it already, and that making it free should be the goal. And I do agree that capital F free housing is what the end goal needs to be, and that people are genuinely entitled to.
And
I guess what I'm the difference in our perspectives comes from like the conditions of where we're at. Like my city, I live in Austin, which is a city that's constantly under development, but all of the new development, there's a housing crisis despite the increase in new development in Austin, because all of the new development that gets made is there's no new public housing projects, there's no new low income housing projects. It's all luxury apartment buildings that sit empty as as a vehicle for investment for real estate companies, because renting it out will lower the property value. So you get tons and tons of apartments built, but you end up with no new homes, or you end up with homes for short-term occupants.
And that's the problem we're going through just now,
Yes.
especially with the Conservatives, because they keep saying, they'll say, "Oh, we're going to build affordable housing," but
Right.
what they mean by affordable is it's not going to be affordable to rent; it's going to be affordable to buy. If you've got a mortgage and you've got good credit, it's great. It's great for you. But most working class people, especially the precariat, don't have good credit because they've been driven into debt for most of their life.
Exactly.
So the point that we need to get to is that we need to take the state built housing, stop using it as somewhere to store our money, and actually put people into these houses, because they're perfectly decent houses.
Yes.
And also, environmentally speaking, and this is how my selling point to social democrats, because they're hardcore green, environmentalists here. You will be saving the ecosystems for years to come, because there are millions of empty houses up and down Scotland and 500,000 homeless people. You could take in all of the fucking Syrian immigrants and still have 60,000 houses empty.
Right. Yeah, no, that's something that's the same in, I think, most areas. Even like there's
and you wouldn't have to build. You have to encroach onto any like green space or any green belts or anything. You wouldn't have to lay a single finger on the thing. Or you can do what the People Before Profit Party in Ireland are wanting to do. And this is actually something that would be incredible if America did it. Is you have a state-owned building company who employs homeless people.
Yeah,
You give homeless people a paid, like a living wage job, and when the job is done, they get a house for nothing.
That does make that does make a lot of sense.
And they're fucking Trotskyists.
Yeah,
It's very difficult to get a good idea of getting a good idea of a trot these days.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. All of these policies are extremely important, and they're like I would never say that the policy I outlined of low cost housing after renting it out, I would never say that's an end goal. I guess the perspective I'm looking at it from is from the perspective of living in an area where there's no public housing or very little public housing constructed, not nearly enough to meet.
Yeah.
And the city, in order the city government and the culture of the city is incredibly skeptical to the idea of building public housing in the first place because of the influence of real estate development companies. And I think that funding the development of new public housing is something that needs to be pitched as a political idea. And while those ideas are both incredible end goals that I think are feasible politically and practically, but in some areas, especially where I live, you need to work up to that a little bit. And that's I guess the bridge that I'm trying to gap with what I'm proposing, which it's sort of like a marketing tool more than anything else, and normalizing the idea of public housing. But yeah. Sorry, were you gonna say something?
No, not really.
Okay.
I was just double checking that the PBP actually did say that. They did. That's actually in their it's still in their manifesto for like the next couple of years. So if they ever get like a majority in the Dáil Éireann, which is the Irish Parliament, that's what they'll end up doing.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, they've got a long list of fucking ideologies on their fucking Wikipedia. Like, it's incredible. I didn't know that you could get all those ideologies just into one fucking page. Like, to be honest.
Yeah.
They're democratic socialists, they're political radicals, they're anti-capitalists, they're eco-socialists, they're Trotskyists, they're soft Eurosceptics, they're feminists, and they're socialists. No shit. No shit.
You wanna ever read a really wild? You want to go on a wild ride of a political manifesto? The Texas Republican Party puts out a new manifesto, or a new I don't know if they call it a manifesto or not, but they put out a new set of policy guidelines for what they stand for each year, and it's always a fucking wild ride. Like they go from stuff like, we want to discourage the destruction of the family through transgender ideologies, to we oppose we oppose taking steps to preserve the Texas great horned lizard from extinction. Like, it's all of these things, from like truly evil and harmful goals to really weird petty goals that I think one real estate developer really wanted in there, so they're like, fine, whatever. It's a wild ride.
Yeah, like if there's anything that I can praise the SNP for, who are the majority party in Scotland,
yeah,
it's they're very good at balancing the economy for social democrats. And I mean this in like the most socialist way possible, because they increase the taxes, but no billionaires are leaving. No.
Well, yeah, I really don't think capital flight is necessarily, like, it's always seen as like, oh, the moment you raise taxes, capital flight will happen. But no, people want to live in nice places. Like, it's if you're taking people's money and not giving them any return from it, yeah, people are going to want to leave. But it's I don't know.
If a businessman has a good workforce in a country, he's not going to care how much he's being taxed,
right?
Like, and like even the conservative members of my family are like that. Said that is like, even if they like closed all the loopholes that stop a tax evasion, and every billionaire was paying their taxes, like, if a billionaire knows what he's fucking doing, he can get that money back to himself through perfectly legal means that isn't hurting anyone.
Right.
Like, they could do what every other fucking businessman does and just get tax-free dollars from the fucking stock market.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Yeah, it's all. I think there's a lot of it's really hard to find a lot of. Sorry, I'm trying to say the same thing like 3 different ways, and it's not. It's I think a lot of liberals will, or even social democrats, will take up positions that are. They have a problem of negotiating with conservatives before. This is mostly an American problem that I've seen. I don't. They have a problem of over negotiating with conservatives before even coming to the table. Like one of the things, and I kind of hate talking about the 2016 American election shit show, but one of the things that really bothered me during that whole time period was in all of the debates that Hillary had with Bernie, her primary selling point was like, these are great ideas, but the Republicans aren't going to let us do that. And if you're bargaining away from your starting position before you even reach the table, you're never going to accomplish even any minor gains in what you want. And I think that's a lot of people on the left will either go too hardline to the point where they don't participate in electoralism at all, which I think is, even though I am an anarchist, I don't necessarily agree with that. Or they'll, or like on the softer side of like liberal or social democrats, they'll negotiate too easily and they'll capitulate too much to the point where they're really just like decelerating the descent into late stage capitalism.
Like I say to my anarchist comrades, you can still vote for the SNP and throw a brick at the police.
Right,
they're
exactly.
not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. But yeah, so sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, you just go on.
Oh, I was about to say, it's getting to the point, it's around 6 p.m. where I live, and it's getting to the point where I'm gonna wrap up the stream and go get some dinner. If you got any parting words to say, if you got like a Twitter or something you want to plug, would you actually mind if I posted this VOD on YouTube? Because I'm trying to get more content up on my YouTube page, and this has been a really interesting
discussion. Go for it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Do you have like a Twitter or anything you'd like to plug?
No.
Nothing at all.
I don't do that Twitter business.
Not Queens.
This is why Democrats don't like AOC. Hello, by the way, adios comment. Okay. Straight up, thank you for the follow. I really appreciate that. So yeah. Sorry, I got a little bit distracted by chat. I don't know what this Artemis guy's deal is.
I've not seen Jenny around in a while.
Actually. Oh, Jenny is like, okay.
Yeah, I know Jenny from another stream.
You know Jenny from another stream. Okay. I'm not sure if you understood the context of those messages. Yeah, I did not. It read to me like, I know that my name is Kami, but sometimes people will come in here and they'll go like, "Are you a communist?" So sometimes that's a little bit of a weird message to receive. Who is on the line? This is sorry, I forgot.
I got you covered.
This is FML Panda 123. So yeah, if you don't have any,
I am trying to remember where I've seen Jenny's face before. What other leftist streamers do you hang around in?
Me or Jenny?
Not Jenny.
I'm a mod on a progressive stream.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
That's where I've seen her.
Okay. So yeah, I think this has been a really productive conversation, and I love having conversations with other leftists where we can sort of like, because like I was saying before you got on, so like there's on Twitch and YouTube especially, there's a lot of like blood sports going on where it's like left versus right, and it's about debunking the other side, it's about farming the omega-lols, it's about doing all that shit, and that's valuable content. I don't want to say that that's like not a good thing, because these things do deserve to be deconstructed, but I'm more interested in hosting like these sort of good faith discussions where we're both trying to work towards something constructive instead of tearing something down. And I do appreciate you coming on and talking about this sort of thing. If you ever have a particular subject you'd like to talk about later, then feel free to send me a DM and we can schedule something like that. But otherwise, for now, I'm gonna shut the stream off. I gotta eat dinner. And I might be on later tonight though. But yeah, it was really nice having you on, man. I appreciate talking to you.
No problem, man. Speak to you later.
Yeah, have a good
Night.
evening or whatever time it is. Night.
Night.
Okay. Have a good night. Alrighty. Oh, I've got a whole bunch of viewers now that I'm going offline. Anyone else disappointed with the lack of Zumbinis being streamed? I will be streaming Zumbinis sometime. It's gonna happen. The problem is Zumbinis is a game that I can't. I'm realistically I can't stream Zumbinis too many times. So I want to leave it for special markers. Like I want Zumbinis to be like when I hit affiliate, I'm absolutely going to do a Zumbini stream. At like certain milestones, I'll do Zumbini streams, but it's not something I want to overdo, you know. Alrighty, but yeah, that was a good conversation. If you missed most of that, it seems like I got a bunch of new people who tuned in at the very end. If you missed most of that, I do plan on putting this VOD up on my YouTube channel. Hold on. Nope. My YouTube channel, it doesn't have anything really productive. One of Hassan's mod streams. Yeah, so my so yeah, I plan on posting the conversation up on my YouTube. Anyone who wants to check that out, I'll probably be putting that up there tonight, as well as the conversation I had yesterday with Musar Music, which I think was really good. So I plan on filling that up with more stream highlights and maybe doing some like prepared content on there. But anyway, for now, I'm gonna go get dinner. I'll be live later tonight. Thank you all for watching and have a great time. All right.